Hello and welcome to another episode of Cayuga Lake Heritage. My name is Tony Ingram. And first of all, I'm going to show us today a map that has just come out from the, is being published by the Cayuga Lake Watershed Network. And this actually shows the sub-watersheds of Cayuga Lake. So you can see Cayuga Lake running from the bottom of the map north up 38 miles to the northern end, which is actually up at Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge, running from Ithaca in the south to Seneca Falls in the north, from Tompkins County to Seneca County on the left-hand side of the lake and Cayuga County on the right-hand side of the lake. But what you see there are a number of different shaded green areas which represent the sub-watersheds of the lake. Now, the entire map shows the watershed. That is all the land that drains water that goes towards Cayuga Lake. And in that drainage, there are various streams like Fall Creek and Inlet Creek, and so the Cayuga Inlet, and many, many other streams, and Taughannock Creek and so forth, that enter Cayuga Lake, and they have large drainage areas of their own. So they're just publishing this new map. It'll be up on their website soon if it isn't already, and you can take a look at it, the Cayuga Lake Watershed. I guess it's cayugalake.org. Check that out. So, well, this is the end of well, not the end. We're winding down on another winter, if you hadn't noticed. And winter is loosening its grip. We've had some thaws, we've had some rains, we've had some cold weather. We've had some weather in the 60s, we've had some weather down around zero. So winter is starting to get ambivalent, and as we all know, and we're looking forward to spring, but of course you can't rush the planet. The planet will progress around the sun at its own speed, and we'll just have to wait for things to happen. But just little bits of evidence that things are changing. This was February 28th, just a couple days ago, at actually yesterday morning, at Taughannock Falls Overlook. And there's the falls. You say, okay, big deal, there's the falls. Well, the falls have got a lot of water in it now, and when it's been frozen, it hasn't had that much water coming over. And at the bottom is the ice cone that builds up at the base of the falls all winter long during long periods of bitter weather. And when we had a thaw, we had rain, and the thaw was in the 40s. It's cutting a canyon on the left-hand side of the ice dome. So I don't know if anybody went up there today, but it's probably more substantially cut out. And eventually that will be completely cut apart and disappear, and we'll all be looking forward to that, I guess. But so of course, Taughannock Falls, Taughannock Creek drains into Cayuga Lake, and so does Cayuga Lake ever freeze? The waterfall nearly freezes, but does Cayuga Lake ever freeze? The lake is really long. This is an aerial view, by the way, by my friend Bill Hecht, who likes to get up in an airplane every once in a while and fly around and take pictures of the landscape, and has given us, and he shares that with everybody. And it's a fantastic resource. So he posts them on the web, and I downloaded this. So this is about where King Ferry is up in Cayuga County. I think that's probably Sheldrake Point on the right-hand side, looking south towards Ithaca. But it's not frozen. Now, this is actually a picture taken early during the winter in which it was taken. I don't think there was much ice on the lake. But typically we get to, let's say, something like this. This was 2 years ago at the south end of Cayuga Lake, down at, well, ice was actually coming down Route 13, looking across the lake, and on the left would be Stewart Park, and on the right, of course, would be the beginning of the lake, and West Hill across there. You can see the guardrail down there. I pulled over, ran out, and took this picture and jumped back in the car because you're not supposed to stop there. But I had to get this shot. And so you can see the lake has frozen over to the, maybe half a mile or so. I don't know how far that is. I remember years ago it freezing much more, and snow would fall on it, and I could ski for a mile or two down the lake, cross-country skis years ago. But Cayuga Lake doesn't get a whole lot more ice than this these days. So, well, back in the really old days, Cayuga Lake was made by ice. Now, I've used this picture before, so it's a great one. It's a painting by William Dildar, who did this in 1952. And this is a depiction of mastodons roaming across the scene on South Hill, looking north to Cayuga Lake. And if you look up in the top center of the picture, you can see a white area. That is a plug of ice, a glacier. So Cayuga Lake, as most of us know, one way or the other, was created by glaciers during the Ice Age, an ancient river valley that was reamed out by the passage of glaciers many times. And here we'll take a look at a glacier here in Norway that in the bottom of the picture is actually a lake with icebergs in it. And this is a huge mass of glacier in central Norway. Central Norway is an ice cap, and kind of like Greenland, but not quite that big. But in any case, the same idea, thousands of feet thick. And the glacier spreads down in the valleys heading towards the sea. And of course, that's where you get all your fjords in Norway, were drowned glacial valleys after the sea level rose at the end of the Ice Age from the melting of all the ice back into the ocean. So let's go to another image here of Cayuga Lake. Now we're looking north. You can see on the left shore there. This is from a commercial air flight I took many years ago, back when the local airlines used to fly through, U.S. Airways used to go through Pittsburgh, so you'd always fly west. And it was great to get that picture. But so anyway, Cayuga Lake is, well, you can see on the left-hand side there, is a peninsula sticking up. That's Taughannock Point. And then right in the center of the picture, you can see this white thing. That's the plume of steam coming off the AES Cayuga electric power generating station that takes coal from West Virginia mountaintop mines, is brought up there and burned to make our electricity and to put global warming gases into the atmosphere. But that's another story. In any case, what I really want to talk about is the cooling of the lake. And Cayuga Lake is what is known as a monomictic lake. What the heck is that? Well, I took a course in basically lake science years ago, limnology, and a monomictic lake means a lake that mixes just once. Mono is Greek for one, mictic, I guess, is Greek for mix. In any case, what that means is that it doesn't usually freeze over. Now, if a lake freezes over, well, it's getting complicated here. If a lake freezes over, then the wind cannot mix the lake in the wintertime. Then when the ice melts in the spring, then the wind can mix all the water in the lake. And then in the summer, when the water warms up, you get a warm layer of water that won't mix with the cold water below. And that's what happens at Cayuga Lake. When it warms up in the spring, by summer, the lake is said to be stratified, and it doesn't mix the warm water above with the cold water deep below. And that's what the Cornell Lake Source cooling system takes advantage of, is that cold water down below to bring it up to cool the campus water. So in a lake that freezes over, you get this mixing time in the spring when the wind mixes the water after the ice is melted. And then in the fall, the lake starts to mix again as it cools off. You no longer have that stratification, and you get another period of mixing, and then it freezes over and there's no mixing because the wind can't mix the water in the lake. So that's called a dimictic lake. Well, we have a monomictic lake because in the fall, when the lake cools off, there's no more stratification. It will just turn over and mix all winter long. So that's what we get. And the water, well, we'll get into later just what happens about that. All right. See what else we got here. So here's another view down the lake to the north. Now, I say down the lake. No, wait a minute. I'm looking. Oh, gee. Which way am I looking here? Oh, maybe I'm looking back towards Ithaca here. That might be here. I'm a little disoriented by my own photograph, Bill Heck's photograph. But most of the lake remains ice-free. But most of the other Finger Lakes, with the exceptions of Seneca Lake. Seneca Lake's like Cayuga Lake. It's a big lake, and it doesn't generally freeze over. But let's look at where do we get here? There we go. Look at that. Now, that's not my picture. I got this off the internet, and this is a picture of Keuka Lake, probably in the early morning, and the sun is glinting off the ice in the lake. Most of the smaller Finger Lakes, if you have a normally cold winter, will freeze over, but generally not Cayuga Lake and Seneca Lake. All right, here. So we're just going to look at some spots around the lake in the wintertime. Now, this is Myers Point, and the point is sticks out in the lake. This is in the town of Lansing, just the northern part of the county. And on the left-hand side of the point, you can see Salmon Creek coming out into the lake. And then if you can sort of follow up to the upper left of the picture, that's actually the Salmon Creek Valley. And you notice in Salmon Creek there's ice because it's shallow there. But when you get out in the lake, you haven't got ice yet, although it's fairly shallow around Myers Point. Okay. Well, take a look at Taughannock Point here. This is another Bill Hecht aerial here. I get some spectacular shots of Taughannock Gorge and Point. Taughannock Point is where the glaciers sheared off the side of the valley and left the trough of Cayuga Lake, and then the creek established itself on the hillside and eroded out the gorge over time. And that's how we get our gorges here. This is looking straight up the gorge. Our waterfalls form on the sides of the glacially excavated, steepened valley side of the lake, and then they've eroded back into the shales of the hillside here. So although this isn't showing you ice, it's showing you the effects of ice, or actually the indirect effects of ice. This is the gorges and waterfalls are resulted from the glaciers setting the stage. Here's another one here. Coming around to the west, looking east over the canyon, and as it winds its way to Cayuga Lake. And notice the point sticks right out at the end of the gorge. And what that point is, Taughannock Creek has carried the eroded rock and soil into Cayuga Lake over thousands of years, and that's where it all went. And the floods that roar through Taughannock in the spring and so forth will carry the earth out there and then dump it into the lake. And just off the point of the just off at Taughannock Point out in the lake there, the lake is as deep as the gorge is here. So it takes a long time for it to move over and to extend out into the lake. But if you go down to the south end of the lake again, this was last winter, about a year ago, and you can see that, again, we had some freezing. I think we didn't get too much freezing at the south end of the lake for periods of time, and then it would thaw. We got a little. And so the reason the south end of the lake freezes is because it's shallow there. For a mile or so north of Stewart Park on the Hyuga Inlet, the water is only about 10 feet deep. So in the shallow portions, the water is able to cool off enough, and it doesn't mix with the general deep water of the lake, which would perhaps keep it from freezing. And so you get some ice down at the south end of the lake. Let's see, what do we got next here to show you? Oh yeah, this is Cayuga Inlet, and this is actually at the farmers market in December. So obviously boating season is over, and will be a while before they start. If you go out there now, you'll see some standing water on the ice in Cayuga Inlet from the rain and the thaw and so forth, and that'll break up eventually. But one of the things that happens is the state lets down the lake in the fall. Lets it down through maybe more than 3 feet. The other end, there are control gates that control the level of Cayuga Lake's water as it empties into the Seneca River and the Erie Canal, and to bring the water down so that when you do get ice along the shore, it doesn't damage people's docks. But maybe even more important is that we get sometimes tremendous runoff from snowmelt and spring rains in March and April that will pump huge amounts of water into the watershed, which the outlet of the lake can't accommodate. So the lake level's been dropped. Of course, in Cayuga Inlet, if you were even if there were not ice here, if you were trying to bring a boat in, you would find that you'd only have maybe 3 or 4 feet of water at best, and maybe less than that in some spots. So the marinas have to scramble to get their boats out of the water before they end up in the mud, and as they let the water down in Cayuga Inlet. And all other marinas around the lake, the whole lake is let down a few feet. But the northern end of the lake is a different story. Now we're looking over what's called Farleys Point, which is south of the town of Union Springs on the east shore of the lake, and you can see that bay there is frozen over largely, and then on the upper part of the picture you can see that the ice continues for quite a distance, maybe 8 or 10 miles from there, because the north end of the lake, the northernmost 8 miles maybe, is 10 feet deep or less in most places, and that's pretty shallow, and so the lake can cool off. There's not a lot of deep water that will mix, that mictic thing, the mixing of the deeper water, which will warm it up. Interesting thing, in the middle of the winter, out in the deep portions of the lake, the actually warmer water can be, slightly warmer water can be down in the bottom or down lower in the depths of the lake, and the surface of the lake might be near freezing, but you go down 50 feet in your water that's maybe 39 degrees or something. And it turns out that that's the temperature at which 39, 40 degrees or 4 degrees centigrade is the temperature at which water is its densest. The molecules are closest together as water cools off, and it becomes its densest, because once it starts to get towards freezing, the molecules start to line up in a crystal pattern, and it actually decreases the density of the water. So the colder water may actually go to the top, and that's why you get the ice on the surface. The whole world would be different. We probably wouldn't have any life on this planet if the opposite were true. If ice were heavier than liquid water and sunk to the bottom, then all of these lake basins and ocean basins would fill up with ice permanently, and we'd have an ice planet like, out there in Pluto or wherever it is. And fortunately, we don't have to think about that. So I'm going to show you another shot here of looking north. This is looking over the village of Union Springs across the lake. You can see that boundary of the frozen lake surface with the open water. And then right to the slightly upper left, you see this dot out in the ice. That is Frontenac Island. That's the only island in Cayuga Lake, and one of the few islands at all in the Finger Lakes. And that's out there, held frozen in the lake there. A lot of interesting things to say about Frontenac Island. As it was an archaeological site, and there were people living there 4,000 years ago that lived on that island and fished on Cayuga Lake. Let's see what we have coming up next here. Well, if you're up at the north end of the lake, maybe you like to go out ice fishing. So here's a couple of guys with snowmobiles, and they're hauling a sled with their ice fishing equipment, and because the water is shallow there, and they can go out on the ice and cut holes in the ice, and maybe even set up a little shack and warming hut and so forth, and catch fish, maybe northern pike or some of the warmer water fish, perch, yellow perch, maybe even some bass. Well, I guess that's not bass season, is it? But and in some places they might even catch a trout. Actually, in some of the other Finger Lakes that freeze over with deeper water, you can get some of the. Although the trout and the salmon, they move around all. When the water is pretty much equal temperature, they move all around the lake. So who knows? Maybe you can catch a trout there. But I don't know much about ice fishing. I watch people do it and scratch my head and walk away. But it is very popular at the north end of Cayuga Lake, and I'm sure that I didn't get up there this season to see, but I'm sure that's been going on. And of course, it's always an issue how thick the ice is and whether it's safe or not. And well, I'm going to read you a couple of stories now. Let's see. How do fish survive the freezing water? This is a little bit of an article in the Cayuga Lake Watershed Network newsletter from, a few years ago. Fish are well adapted to surviving the winter underwater. Being cold-blooded, their body temperature is equivalent to that of the water, which is sometimes freezing. In order to stay alive at low temperatures, their metabolism slows down, growth ceases, and they are basically on a maintenance diet. However, the degree to which their systems and activities slows down varies considerably from species to species. Cold-water species like trout and salmon remain relatively active, frequenting the deep, cold reaches of the lake. Small trout feed heavily on mysis, a shrimp-like creature that lives offshore. Mysis move up and down in the water column in response to sunlight. In order to feed, the small trout actively follow their movement. Large trout enhance their diet and activity by feeding on smaller fish, including alewives and smelt. Warm water fish like pickerel, pike, sunfish, and bass have different strategies for enduring the winter water. Many stay in shallow, weedy areas and reduce their activity levels. Even with reduced energy, large pickerel will ambush any fish they can swallow, including trout. However, neither the cold nor warm water predators can resist bait dropped through the ice, and both fall prey to ice fishers even at the coldest temperatures. So that's why they're out there. See what else we got coming up here image-wise. Ooh, so has Cayuga Lake ever frozen end to end? Indeed it has. In fact, it's frozen end to end a number of times in history. And I have some data here that I'm going to read you. This is actually a view of the village of Cayuga. So up in that area where there was typically freezes from out on the lake. This is an old picture, could be 100 years old. Once again, thanks to Bill Hecht, I believe, on this. In any case, so I got an assemblage of records of when the lake has frozen. So I'm going to bring myself back up to the... Here we go. Hi, that's me. I'm still here, not just a disembodied voice. So I've got some statistics here from Nelson Hairston, who is a Hairston Jr., who is a limnologist, an environmental scientist at Cornell. In fact, he's the chair of the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology, Cornell, and he's come out on the floating classroom on the MV handle out on Cayuga Lake that goes out of the farmers market and the Hyuga Inlet, and there are eco cruises all through the season that are supported by grant and so forth like that. So it's so I went out with him once. We had a discussion following the cruise about when has the lake last frozen, and I was saying the last time it really froze solid, well, not solid, but froze the entire surface end to end, that you could say, with confidence, was 1912, 99 years ago. This being 2011. But there's a number of times that it seems to have frozen since then. But I'm going to go down the list of years that people have said the lake is frozen end to end. 1796, 1816, 1818, 1836, 1856, 1875, 1884, maybe 1885, 1904, 1912, 1918, 1934, maybe 1936, 1948, 1962, and 1969, and almost in 1994. And I remember that it froze all the way to Myers Point from Ithaca, and it was temporary, just a few days, and not very thick ice. But so the average or mean interval between years between complete freeze-overs is 14.1. So about every 15 years. But it's been 31 years since Cayuga Lake, anybody has said, yep, Cayuga Lake is frozen end to end. I was working at Taughannock Falls State Park. Just started there in 1979, and I started there in January, and the lake is said to have frozen in February, I think. And I said, well, maybe it froze up to Taughannock, but the lake, of course, was probably just for a short period, so you didn't get snow on the ice, so it was probably clear ice, and maybe it did. Maybe it did. There seemed to be some discussion about that. But in any case, the lake has, in 1912, was the big one. And I have a few images of that people have described. This is an ice boat. This is actually on Seneca Lake. But a lot has been written about that particular 1912 freeze-over. I'll start reading a little bit from an article by Barbara Bell. I think this was probably in the Ithaca Journal. She had a column called Glance Backward, and she's a local historian, and she's been the Schuyler County historian for many years now, but used to write for the Ithaca Journal. Cayuga and Seneca Lakes froze from end to end in January of 1912. Skaters traveled the whole length of the lakes. There were soft spots, rough areas, and barely visible cracks and holes. but sledding, ice boating, and other sports were widely enjoyed and contests were organized. Chairs were mounted on sleds, and skaters pushed youngsters and the elderly across icy expanses. Horse rigs towed riders across the ice, and in at least one case, an auto was tested on the slick surface. See if I have that picture here. Oh, yeah. Here's one. Here's an automobile, 1912. A Maxwell. I've never even heard of a Maxwell, but there's a Maxwell out on Cayuga Lake. Let's see. The Maxwell, there it is. It's top brazenly open. It appeared on Seneca Lake near Valois, with chains on the rear tires and bearskin rug for the comfort of those brave enough to tour the ice. Okay, so there's a little bit. 3 Ithaca friends who skated the length of Cayuga Lake in 1912. They started out a strong wind from the south, boosted their speed. I'm not going to give you their names. Crisscrossing from Kidder's Landing to King Ferry, they found open water near the middle of the lake, but some previous adventure had bridged the opening with an adequate board. Close to shore, they found the ice soft and hazardous, or rough and cracked. The trio stayed away from the shore and as an extra safety feature, proceeded in single file, staying several feet apart. The burned wreckage of the steamship Frontenac was still partially submerged off Farleys Point, which we saw frozen in that earlier picture, and the Ithacans skirted her. Arriving at Cayuga, they found a large gathering of sleighs, sleds, and cutters. The men, as they began the return trip, found the wind chill factor most forbidding and stopped at Aurora to spend the night. Come morning, they boarded the train and rode in comparative comfort for the balance of the trip home. Their arrival in Ithaca caused quite a stir, for many believed them dead. Word had reached Ithaca that 3 young men had broken through the ice and had been lost, but no one knew exactly who they were or where. Ultimately, the rumors proved only too true. 2 Cornell students had broken through near King Ferry and drowned. A 3rd skater with them, Rodney Newman, a close friend of Bailey's, one of the other skaters, hoisted himself from the chill waters and was saved. So that was 1912, and that was the last time that you really had some really solid freezing that you get these kind of stories from. But you know, maybe some of the later ones were also substantial. I just don't have, nobody seemed to have written about them. So what I'm showing here is the final picture I'm going to show you. This is of cutting ice. Ice cutting industry. Used to be an ice cutting industry on all the lakes and ponds because in the old days we didn't have refrigerators. It wasn't until mid 20th century that people had refrigerators, and up until the 1930s or so there was a big ice industry on Cayuga Lake. So this is an image of, actually this is obviously on Valois, this is on Seneca Lake, but the same sort of thing was on Cayuga Lake. Okay, well that's all we've got today, and so I want to thank you all for joining me, and we'll see you next time.